What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 651. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Unlimited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, fresh off of the set championship for New Capenna, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how was your tournament?
It was good. I finished with a 10-5 record, which is good enough to give me an additional qualification above the one I would get for Hall of Fame, because now I think we talked about it on the show, but for those who aren't kind of up on what Magic's doing, which is, I don't blame you, it seems to change every couple of months at this point. There's 3 Pro Tours next year. They're coming back, the Pro Tour, everything. They're going to be quite a bit harder to qualify for, but if you do qualify for them, they're going to be pretty sweet. And as a member of the Hall of Fame, I get 1 invite per year, except by going 9 and 6 or better, I actually get 2 invites. So I get an extra invite by going 10-5. Happy about that. Less happy that I needed to win probably 2 more rounds and I would have made it to the World Championship. But, you know, is what it is. So didn't quite get there.
Those ones are tough. The season-long battles, you know, where like you're scrapping it out for every win you can get it. And you're good enough to always put yourself in that contention seat, right? Like, you know, it's been multiple years where you're right on that cusp and you just needed like that one extra thing, but it's just really tough because it's not like
I didn't notice.
Yeah. You didn't check your standings at the end of the past like 4 years, or it's tough, but I'm proud of you, man. That was another really, really good season, and you've set yourself up well going into the next one with an invite in your pocket. Cause as you said, you know, this new system that we're going into, it pushes things downward, right? Like it's open to a lot more people, but you were one of the people at the top. You were a league player, right? And, you know, you managed to get into that the hard way, by the way, which is also worth noting, because that was very, very difficult. I mean, the biggest complaint about the old system was that it was inaccessible. But you found access, you know, and got your way in there. But I like that you've set yourself up well going into the next season of Pro Tours and stuff, because it is harder. You know, it's going to require a bit more of a grind to stay on the train, I think. But you're in a good spot with a couple of invites in your pocket. And nice finish too, man. 10-5 is no joke. Like, you know, not a bunch, but a few players made it to top 8 on 11-4. Like you were right up there with the best of that tournament. So nice job. And that was the last scheduled set championship. That was it. That era is now behind us. We've got World Championship coming up later this year, but that was weird. We got to the end of the show and it was like, wow, we've been doing these for like 2 years now, like this, under this format with this setup and everything. And now, you know, the eye is going to shift back over to paper. But the good news with that, one of the many good things about it is that Limited will be back on the menu for the Pro Tours again. We've had a really long stretch here with very little Limited at the top play of the game, and pretty excited for that. One interesting thing, by the way, Luis, before we get into the show, was we did an interview with Mike Segrist, and he brought that up. He said, you know, like, well, you know, he had a great tournament, and he brought up getting a chance to play at the World Championship, which he qualified for. And he was like, I get to draft against people who maybe don't really know how to booster draft. And he was kind of licking his chops, you know, because like that is a whole nother world. And we've really had a couple of years where the players that have come to the top are either players like you who are just good at all the formats, or, you know, people that are really good at constructed. And we're going to see if they're good at limited, you know, when the new seasons and the new World Championship starts. At any rate, lots to look forward to there. But today we're going to focus back in on the present. That's right. Streets of New Capenna. It's still out. It's still a thing. We're going to talk about kind of state of the format. We talked about this a bit last week, but we're going to take a little bit of a bigger picture look. And then we're going to drill down into some good meaty info for you about what we feel is likely the best 2-color pair to start from, which is blue, white, and then how you branch out into the other colors that are adjacent from there. Before we get into all that, let's talk about our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all things Magic related. They've got the marketplace. That's a place where when you go search for a card now, you get shown cards from a whole bunch of different shops rather than just one, which gives you a lot of purchasing power and agency over pricing and condition and that type of stuff. They've also got Channel Fireball Pro, CFB Pro, where you can learn from some of the best players in the world. If you're here listening to this show, you're probably interested in improving your game. You're probably like Luis and I, where We love playing the game in general, but what really motivates us is improvement and ultimately winning, right? And doing the best that we can with the tools that we have. And if you're like that, CFP Pro is definitely right up your alley. This is actionable, useful information from some of the best players about how to get better at the game. We're not talking about, stuff that's made to be just pure entertainment or funny or, satire articles or whatever. We're talking about useful stuff that you can put into play when you're done reading the article. That's what we strive for here on this podcast, right? We want our information that we give you to be actionable and useful and practical, not just theoretical. And that's what you'll find over at CFP on CFP Pro as well. If you do end up pick up anything over at CFP, if you use the affiliate code LR, it's just when you get to the checkout, there's a little box. If you just type in LR, it basically just lets them know that we're the ones that sent you over. And we really appreciate it because it helps out the show and it lets CFP know that they're getting their value as well. And that's important from a marketing standpoint. So thanks for that. The show's also brought to you by FTX, a place to manage all of your digital assets. FTX.us here in the United States, where Luis and I live. FTX.com outside the United States, for example, where producer Jeff lives. And you can find out all about various different types of digital assets, how to manage them, buy, sell, trade, that type of stuff. If you are looking into it, though, we encourage you to make sure that you educate yourself about cryptocurrencies, blockchain, that type of stuff before jumping in, because there is risk involved. And like with any investment, you want to consult an investment professional before doing so. But once you're ready, once you feel comfortable, FTX is the place to go. FTX.com outside the US, FTX.us here in the United States. And of course, the show is brought to you by you via the Patreon. This is a way to directly support the show. It's patreon.com/limited resources. And everybody that signs up for that gets a thank you card and a sticker in the mail. And also you can submit questions for the question of the week, questions for our Q&A episodes, and for special guests. We'll often put up questions about that type of stuff, and it kind of gives you a direct line to us. We want to thank each and every person who chooses to support us on Patreon. It means a lot. The question that we have here is from Todd, who says, first, just wanted to say that I've really been enjoying Marshall's daily draft videos. Thanks for those. You're welcome, Todd. I've actually haven't done one in a few days here since the PT was going on the weekend. But that's also because I haven't drafted in that time frame. I was too busy during that stretch, and now I'll get back on the horse and start putting up the videos again, but I'm glad you're enjoying them. If you're wondering what he's talking about, I have put up basically every draft I've done, not literally, but almost every single draft I've done of Streets of New Capenna on the LR YouTube channel. So you can watch me draft from the beginning stages to where I'm at now, see what my preferences are, watch me win great trophies and punt it all away. It's all there on the LR YouTube channel. Anyway, question here from Todd says, one thing I notice in the videos is that Marshall is usually targeting the opponent with the mill from deal gone bad. This comes up a lot because it's clunky removal in Maestros. Good point, Todd. How do you guys how do you guys think about when you break a heuristic, like usually target yourself with mill for a small number? And I'll tell you, for me, that's a great question, Todd, because yes, normally I would target myself, particularly in Maestros. There are payoffs for it, and I often do. I don't want it to be painted as if I never do, but there are times quite often where if you're lacking on win conditions, if you're lacking on ways to kind of finish the game via punch, you can deck yourself. That's actually happened to me in the format more than once, where it became a real concern and I ended up losing as a result. So if I feel like, for example, I don't have very many payoffs or any payoffs to get to the five costs or whatever in my yard, if that's not what my deck's trying to do, if I'm looking at the game and going, oh no, I'm going to need another 10 turns here and I've got 2 more card draw spells in my deck, that's when I'll start pointing it over to the other side. Otherwise, Todd, you're 100% correct. The default is to target yourself. Most formats have some way to benefit you for having cards in your graveyard these days. I would say it's more common than not for there to be a mechanic that benefits you for having them. And it's very rare that a format will fully support a mill sub theme. We have seen that happen, but like this one has a few random mill cards, including a rare, and even then it still isn't good enough. So generally speaking, if it's just for a few cards, you should be targeting yourself. And you are correct about that, Todd. Like I said, the reason I don't is if I legitimately look at my game plan and figure that I need to kind of find all the action I can, I'll go for that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Luis?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing to note is like, a heuristic is just that. A heuristic is a rule of thumb. It's a general rule that lets you shortcut making decisions. Well, in this particular case, you don't get to, because the decision, the correct thing to do is to actually look at all the information and then decide from there. And for the reasons you stated, I think that I also don't tend to target my opponent as often as you would expect with these mill cards, because you do end up in a spot where, you don't know if the game is going to actually get closed out by then. You don't know if you're going to have enough gas to actually finish things off, because the way this format tends to work is the games go long. There's also quite a bit of, ways to drag things out, and not as many ways to actually get advantage from the graveyard, which is kind of funny. But it just turns out this format's really not about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because, it's the sort of thing where formats that do that tend to be sweeter, but that's just not what this format is about.
Yeah, it's interesting because this format's not sweet, right? Like, and I mean in the way that you and I use it, right? Where we've had formats that we even thought weren't very good, but we're like, but this is sweet. Like, we're doing crazy stuff, but it's kind of one note, or it doesn't happen often enough, or whatever. But this format is really on the, I don't know what the other end of the spectrum is from sweet, but it's definitely not sweet. Like, it's very rare that I do something that feels creative or cool.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that, I'm sure. But this format is pretty straightforward, and it just turns out most people aren't messing around with the kind of stuff that milling yourself would be a drawback for. So you should just mill your opponent.
Yep, there you go. All right, let's do our Crack-a-Pack here. And thanks for that question, Todd, by the way, for Streets of New Capenna. First card out, a real stinker, Halo Scarab.
Yeah, not a fan of this one. This is the 2/1 that you can X out from a graveyard to get a treasure.
Yeah, seems like it would be fine, but no, you can do better. Quick Draw Dagger. So where are you on Quick Draw Dagger now? You infamously came in pretty hot in the first couple of weeks, and you were calling it Ember Cleave. Are we still on the baby cleave here, or?
I mean, I wouldn't. To be fair, when I was calling it Ember Cleave, that was a little tongue in cheek. It's not actually Ember Cleave, of course, but I like it if I have enough ground creatures. Is what it comes down to. We're going to talk about blue white, and like that's a good example of a deck that sometimes you play it and sometimes you don't.
That's a really good broader topic that we can't really go super far into during the Crack-a-Pack, but that I always am on the lookout for examples of where you can look at a card like on 17 lands and see that it has like a decent win rate. I don't know the Quick Draw Dagger's win rate off the top of my head, but let's just say it's decent. So you're like, it's a pretty good card, right? Where you do need to still be applying your own layer of logic to it, right? Where if you have ground creatures, they're more likely to interact in combat with other ground creatures. And that makes Quick Draw Dagger better because you can sometimes turn it into a removal spell that you get to have a decent little equipment left over on, right? Where if you have a whole bunch of flyers, spending a card and 3 mana, maybe 4 mana to give your flyer just one additional point of power isn't really where you want to be very often. So this is a perfect example of you needing to still hold yourself accountable for filtering on, okay, there's no such thing in most scenarios where a card is just good, right? There's a few cards that meet that requirement, of course. But for the most part, cards are good in certain conditions and less good in other conditions. You always need to be applying that. Sometimes they're just bad. Jackhammer. Funny enough, this could be a card that you might actually want in a Flyers deck, right? +2 power to one of your Flyers and you could kill them, but it's red. It doesn't fit into anything and it's just bad.
Yeah, I've actually never seen that in play on my side or the opponent's, So
you haven't had the intense pleasure of losing to a Jackhammer. I have.
That was lovely.
On video too. Yeah, it was bad. Civil Servant is next. I like this one. This is the green-white 2/3, and whenever it attacks, you can tap another untapped citizen to give it +1/+0 and lifelink.
Yeah, Civil Servant's good. I don't tend to be green-white nearly as much as I'm blue-white, so I wouldn't love to start with a 2-color card. Even if it's in a good 2 colors that's of this power level, I think you can generally do better for your pick one, pack one.
Luis is going to convince us of the intense power of blue-white. As of now, I would say of those 2 pairs, I'm about 50-50. So I actually would be fine with Civil Servant. I'm like, yeah, give me that guy. I'm in. interesting card that has been popping up more and more. In fact, I'm going to look it up on 17 lands because I'm wondering if I wonder if it has a better, like a sneaky better win percentage, is Goldhound. Do you have any sense for Goldhound?
Goldhound has been really unimpressive when I played with it.
I have also found it very, very bad, but people have been playing it. They really have. Let me take a quick look.
I doubt it's been winning, though. I mean, maybe it has, but I would be kind of surprised.
I also would be very surprised, but I'm going to tell you right now that it has not been winning.
There we go.
It's,
I mean,
yeah, it's
the funny thing is, it actually
50%.
looked like it could be pretty good. Like,
yes.
I don't think it looks bad, but it just kind of is.
Yeah, it's funny because that's exactly how I thought. I also thought, hey, this could be one of those sneaky one drops, right? Because we've had one drops be the best common a lot of the time for its color in the last sets, last couple of years of sets. And some of them looked just kind of okay at first. And then you're like, oh no, but it fits and it does this and it does all that. And I was thinking maybe Goldhound could be that card when we first saw it. And then after playing with it, I was like, oh no, it's just bad. And
You're
now
not that guy, Goldhound.
Yeah, and now it's coming back. Yeah. Sorry, Goldhound. Revelation of Power is next. That's the 1 and a white. Instant target creature gets +2/+2 until in turn. If it has a counter, it gets lifelink and flying.
Oh, I'm in for Revelation of Power. I play this card a lot more often than I would have expected to, or just like at the start of a format, you look at a combat check, how often are you going to play this? Mm-hmm. Revelation of Power is certainly above that number, but again, I'm not first picking it, and I would take Civil Servant over Revelation of Power. I'm not like that far down the rabbit hole.
That's what I was going to ask you too, and I would do the same. Revel Ruiner. This is the 3 and a black 3/1 with Menace, and when it ETBs, you connive. I mean, this is the perfect example to me of a type of card that just totally should be good. Like, there's nothing wrong with this card. Like, you can get a 4/2 Menace for 4. Connive is awesome. Menace with high-powered creatures tends to be, that's where you want it to be anyway, and the card just never sees play.
Yeah, it's the kind of card I'll put in my deck if I end up very short on playables.
Yes.
But it's not a particularly good card. A really big part of it is you're spending that much mana and getting not enough toughness.
Mm-hmm. Totally. That's true. That's a big deal. 1 toughness in this format's very weak. Psionic Snoop. Hey, you wanted toughness. Here you go. 2 and a blue, 0/3 flash when it ETBs, you connive. Just too low impact, right? Like at the end of the day, It just isn't doing enough.
Yeah, I'm not a big Snoop fan.
The wrapper or the psionic variety?
I mean, I actually do like the wrapper, but
so there you go. Rox Pummeler, 5 and a green, 6/3. It's got trample as long as it has a counter. Comes with a shield counter on it.
Yeah, so this one's funny because at the start of the format, I was surprised by how good Rox Pummeler ended up being.
Yes,
I'm like, oh, Rox Pummeler is actually like pretty good, and then by the end, I'm not that high on it. Like it's fine. I'll still put it in my deck, but the amount of how often I'll play it has certainly gone down.
Me too. I went from having it a little bit below average to just a little above average. Like I was like, this does actually fill the role for this deck. Like it's, green white is kind of where I picture it mostly. Pretty aggressive. It is a very big pain to deal with for them if you just need to get in for 4 damage. Like it really does put them in fits about what to do. And then after playing with it for a while, playing against it, I'm like, how about just average? Yeah. It's an average card. And I can look it up. It is, so it's 54.5% game in hand win rate. But remember, with the skew for 17 Lance players, winning on average more than 50%, that puts it like right in that average range. So
I think it's like slightly above average for,
like, I think isn't it 53 or something for them?
Yeah. So slightly above average.
Yeah. I did say range.
Yeah.
Last comment is Obscura Storefront. So there you go. So what do you like out of the commons here? Servant, Storefront?
I think I would take the Civil Servant. Look, I'm not unhappy with a storefront in general, but I'm not slamming that thing. Okay. For first pick or whatever. Like, I do like drafting blue white, but not to the exclusion of everything else. And I really do think it's important to have 2 drops no matter what colors you are. That's one of the things people actually kind of don't like about this format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And we'll touch on that. Uncommons, Syndicate Infiltrator. That's the 2 blue, black 3/3 flyer. And as long as you got 5 or more types in your yard, it gets +2/+2.
I like this card. It's usually a 3/3, but it's pretty meaningful when it becomes a 5/5.
Mm-hmm.
Would I take it here over Civil Servant? No, I would take Civil Servant over it.
Yeah, I would definitely take Servant myself. Next card is Broker's Charm. That's a really good card. Green, white, blue. Choose 1. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and then it punches something on the other side, or you can destroy an enchantment, or you can draw 2 cards.
Broker's Charm is great. I mean, it's one of the cards I do tend to splash for. I think I would lead on Broker's Charm over Civil Servant, but that's pretty close.
Yeah, that is pretty close. Civil Servant.
So
more
part
likely
of the argument for Broker's Charm over Civil Servant in this case is that Civil Servant goes in basically one deck, which is green white, because it's not the kind of card you'll splash for, right?
Right.
Whereas Broker's Charm you'll splash for in blue white or green white, and I think that's a pretty meaningful distinction. Also, if you do want to advance the argument of like, well, what about you're just straight brokers? First of all, that's not advisable really in this format, and second, if you are straight brokers, I would still rather have Broker's Charm than Civil Servant.
Yes.
So
I hesitate to tell you this, but that's a really good point that you just made. Suspicious Bookcase. Let's just say people are not walking by this bookcase with a suspicious look. They don't even notice it's there because nobody plays it. 2 mana, 0/4 with Defender. You can pay 3, tap it to give creature unblockable until end of turn.
Yeah, this is not a card.
What I found is that this format is very, very hostile towards expensive mana sinks. Things like expensive equipment don't play well. Things like Suspicious Bookcase don't play well. Best example is probably Maestro's 3/1.
The Maestro's Initiate? Yeah.
Right. That activated ability on Maestro's Initiate is very powerful. Like there's
formats where this would have been among the better cards you could hope for.
Yes. And like, because when you get to the late game, when you get to the late game and you have like, you draw an extra land for you're just like, okay, I have a land in my hand, and you activate the Initiate, like you're seeing 2 extra cards and then you get to ditch the land as part of that equation. Like it is really a powerful card draw spell late. And it's just too slow. Like, I just find that like there's never a window for me to put it. I was going to ask you about this. Are the dual lands that you can crack for a card part of the reason like that they take care of that part for us, where if I'm going to be doing that late game, that's it? Like, why is it that I find it so difficult to find a window to activate that, or like that I would just never want Suspicious Bookcase ever?
Well, I think there's 2 main reasons. One is that every set these days has a lot of ways to have action, whether that's contained, within the mechanics, like the flip lands that are lands or spells, or cycling. All those things kind of increase the amount of action you have, like they smooth out the game, right? And then the other is this set in particular is pretty fast and tempo oriented, right? We've seen that. That's part of why we're like, hey, we should draft the 2-color deck, not a 3-color deck. Given that, like, you just don't have time to do these things. So it's like, it's more on the speed of the format, but even in other formats, you do see this effect where you're like, yeah, like these, there's a lot of card advantage mechanics. There's a lot of ways to have like learn lesson, stuff like that. Just means like, there's been limited formats where an artifact that costs 3 and is like 3 tap draw a card would be absurd, right? Like, and that's even a card that they printed in like commander sets. They haven't printed that exact card in a base set, but like 3 in a modern limited, a 3-mana artifact that's 3 tap draw a card, I don't think would be outrageous to print.
I don't think so either. I think it would be good, and in the right format could be great. But yeah, like here, I don't know that I'd be that interested.
Card in your new Capenna deck?
I don't think so.
Well, yeah, sure. If you've got 3 Strangles and you're playing red black and all that, sure, you can build a deck where this card is good.
Yes,
but does your blue-white tempo deck want it? And B, do you want it when you're playing against blue-white tempo?
Exactly.
And the answer to both those is, I think, no. And that's kind of why, like, yes, the lands are good because the lands are basically free. We would play these lands without the sack ability. A gate, right? A come into play tap for 2 colors land. That's just good. You need to be able to cast your spells. The fact that you can sack them to draw a card means the 1 in 5 games where that comes up, you're pretty happy to do it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I'm, kind of itching to get Maestro's Initiates into my deck. I found that card to be pretty mediocre. Like sometimes you'll activate it, but I would say like 1 out of every 4 times that you have that card in your graveyard, you're able to activate and have it be good, not
exactly
activate it, concede or whatever.
Yeah. And I like I have that card as just a straight up D, right? It's a card that I don't routinely put in my main. It sometimes sneaks in there if I'm a little short on playables, and it's not embarrassing. The 1 toughness probably matters for it too, which is a little harder to factor in. But still, that activated ability in the late game is really good. All right, last card is our rare, and it is just an absurdly big miss. It's Cemetery Tampering. That's the 2 and a black enchantment with Hideaway 5. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may mill 3 cards. Then if there are 20 or more cards in your graveyard, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost.
Yeah, this one I've never even seen anyone try to play this. It seems so bad.
Yeah, it's a weird fit, right? Because I think that if you took it at face value, you might be able to talk yourself into having this card in the set. Like, well, there is a Graveyard Matter sub-theme for like the blue-black deck or whatever. And you're like, oh, okay. But it's like not really built to be cumulative. You don't get like a card like if this set had Flashback, for example. A card like Cemetery Tampering kind of gets interesting because you're actually loading up your graveyard with spells, right? With things that you can do. If this set had Disturb and you're like, okay, mill myself for 3. Oh, sweet, I hit a Disturb creature, get that thing on the battlefield. I'm generating an advantage now. This is just a very strange form of Delirium that's quite difficult to get. I kind of feel bad for the R&D folks on this one because what it always feels like to me is that 4 is too easy and 5 is too hard. And there's just, there's no such thing as 4.5. So, it's a little tough because I can get to 4 most games without really trying, but waiting for that 5th type sometimes never even happens, So at any rate, it's also tough because even though we need to view these cards in a vacuum as far as like, where do we pick them? How do we rate them and stuff? This is so much worse than the other, like Rabble Rousing or whatever, like that's just like a bomb that wins you the game almost on its own. And Cemetery Tampering does like almost nothing and might get you some card selection in a slightly cheaper card or whatever. And that's after you put yourself at risk of getting milled. It's just a slow, clunky 1-for-1 that just doesn't get the job done. So here it's Broker's Charm, Civil Servant. Maybe if you're in the, market for a Syndicate Infiltrator, Obscure Storefront or something. But for me, I would take Broker's Charm. I like the way you said it's perfect is that I could be white, green or blue, white, which is kind of where I want to be anyway, and still play this card. You too?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Broker's Charm.
So
not an exciting first pick. It's no, inspiring Overseer, but
no, that we can't get that lucky. Somehow a much, much better card, even though it's cheaper and whatever. Not cheaper, easier to cast. Okay, so I want to do another quick check-in here on the format because this one has been a very bumpy ride for Streets of New Capenna out of the gate. On social media and stuff. I mean, I've seen people call the set godforsaken, terrible, awful. We do live in a little bit of a hot take culture / environment, right? People, especially people on social media and people who make content, they feel that they have some incentive to say something a little outrageous, a little forceful, a little, put my foot down and I'm going to make a big statement here. You and I tend to not play that game very much. I don't find it particularly useful for the audience, for us to spout off about stuff. So, and also when we do have a strong opinion, then they actually know it because it doesn't just blend in with every other, so-called strong opinion that we've had. What do you make of that when you see people? Because that to me comes off as like, that doesn't line up with my experience with the format. I am not in love with it, but I don't know. This is nowhere near bottom formats for me of the last, 10 years or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think it's in the bottom for me either. It's not good though. Like I think it is below average. Like I don't know about 10 years, but if I said like the past 5 years of formats, if that basically Ixalan was like the last really truly abysmal format I can remember, though. I did not like AFR a whole lot more than that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that this is, better than both those, like by a decent amount. Crimson Vow, like it's near Crimson Vow levels of like, definitely not going to be my favorite format. I'm not going to do 200 drafts of it or whatever. I'm not going to, probably not going to do 100 drafts of it. Whereas in some formats I will do that. But it's got some cool stuff. I think that there is a couple things going on. One is a mismatch between expectations and reality. And that expectations are actually kind of like the root of all unhappiness in a lot of ways, right? Mm-hmm. Like some people, they get their test back, they get a B-, and they're just like stoked. I mean, you've been there, right? I've had classes where when I got a B- on a test, I was just like, wow, this was like near the top of the range, what I could expect. Mm-hmm. I'm really happy about this. And there's some people who get a B- on their test and they're like, what the hell? This is awful. I'm so mad right now.
Yeah.
And I've been that person too, because, like it really depends on your expectations. If you go in thinking you're going to crush, you get a B-, you're unhappy. You go in thinking you're going to fail and you get a B-, you're stoked. Same reason at the Pro Tour. I've been 6-2 and having dinner with someone who's 6-2 with a dramatic difference in happiness levels, because one of us was 6-0 and lost the last 2. The other started 2-2 and won the last 4.
Classic poker thing too. Yeah, exactly. It's like you if you start out down and you make a comeback to average, you're like, yes. And
you're only as good as your last round.
That's right. Yeah, it's a strong psychological thing for sure.
And New Capenna has a couple things like that. One is it's a 3-color set. I mean, we came in thinking, sweet, gold cards, 2 cycles of lands at common, a cycle of tri-lands, and a cycle of double lands at common. Like, we've got these tricolor fixers you exiled. They're a little slow, but they look powerful. It didn't really deliver on that for the people who were hoping for that.
Yeah.
It just hasn't. Like, I think if I were like working on the set, I would be kind of unhappy that part didn't come through, because I can't speak to what their motivations were when making the set, what they wanted to do. Like, if one of the designers told me, hey, we went for a twist to subvert your expectations, it's actually a fast 2 and a splash color format, not a slow 3-color format or whatever, then I would be like, okay, I understand you were going for that. Well, you got there, but this is, you subverted our expectations like Game of Thrones did. It's not the place to be. So I think that definitely is part of it. The other part is you missed on a couple of the families, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brokers head and shoulders above most all the families, with Maestro's not far behind, actually. Maestro's actually is quite good as well. But this really leaves Cabaretti and Riveteers kind of like in the dust. Like, Obscura also fine because it's blue blight and blue black, and both those are pretty good color combinations. But Riveteers and Cabaretti just are not very good.
Yes.
And when your base level is like 5 3-color pairs or triples or whatever, plus the 5 allied colors, that's 10 decks. Even though people kind of expected there to be like more on the 3-color pair side, and then a bunch of those are actual misses, then I don't think people are gonna be very happy. Like they're gonna be like, well, this isn't really a 3-color format. It's kind of like a 2-color-ish aggressive format. Obviously, people play 3 colors. I don't mean literally decks are 2 colors. Almost every deck I draft has 3 colors in it, but it's not a split 3 almost ever. And when you do splash, it's with a mind to like, I can't let this slow me down too much.
Right.
You're not splashing
being
the sweet
very
stuff.
responsible splashing rather than just straight up playing the colors.
And then you also find out that a bunch of the color pairs or the trios are just not ones you should try to draft. Like, you should try to avoid that if you can. And that adds up, I think, to a lot of disappointment. And that's kind of what we're seeing, right? We're seeing a lot of like, okay, it's been a week. What else is there for me in this format? I'm not thrilled about this, Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. And one thing I want to speak to on the design side, which is interesting, I hadn't really thought about it before we started talking about today. Right now, we're living in a world where people draft so many times, right? Mm-hmm. And I bet you could look back at some other formats in the past and be like, wow, this format really didn't live up to my expectations. This is kind of unfortunate. This kind of sucks.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up to you because we do have to adjust for the era that we live in. right? And the era we live in is the era of best of one drafts on Arena. That's what rules the day. There was an era where, I mean, Magic Online's been around for long enough that basically, they've been run in tandem since Limited's been really popular or whatever, for the masses. So where you would have to play non-league booster drafts. So if you did that in real life, you probably know what that's like if you listen to the show. And if you did it on Magic Online, it was actually somewhat similar, like in terms of how clunky it was. For example, you would have to wait till there were exactly 8 people ready to play the format that you wanted and the stakes that you wanted, because they did offer 3 different levels of stakes or payout structures. And then it would fire, everybody drafts at the same time. Then you'd get a timer, 20 minutes or whatever it was to build your deck. And so that would...
I'm just tickled pink by the idea of people listening to this who are like, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
And they'd be right.
And I guarantee you there are a lot of people who are like, totally. Are you serious right now?
I don't know when the last time I did an 8-player time draft except like in paper, but that's obviously a very different thing.
Exactly.
Online, I just haven't. Ever.
Me neither. And
in like 5 years.
And there's some cool upsides that you get from that. In-pod drafting does have a cool extra wrinkle that you get to know a bit more about what your opponent's up to, what cards you pass, what colors they might be, and also the packs, the matches self-correct a little bit more, because everybody's sort of limited by the card pool, the power of the card pool that was open between you, where when you take your deck into a league format, you could have an absolutely banging card pool for 8 players, and the top 3 of those ones get to go out into the world with like an insanely good deck, where if your pool was really weak or just weird, or you had somebody drafting strange and kind of screwed everything up, then your deck can be pretty bad, and you're going to end up playing against players with a better deck, and there really wasn't any balancing happening. So there's some neat things, but the convenience is so much better. It just allows you to draft so much more. And since they changed that to the league structure on Magic Online, and then when Arena came out, it was only in league structure, we've never looked back. And it's been the best time to be a Limited player, because you can play Limited now on 3 sort of major ways: real life, Magic Online, or Arena. You have a lot of different prizes, I guess I would say, structures, whatever. You can play best of 1 or best of 3, that kind of stuff. So it's really great, but we have to recognize how different it is. And I think that Wizards has to recognize how different it is. I have no reason to think that they don't, but it makes a set like this feel a lot worse, I think, than it would have before. And that's kind of what you were getting at, right, Luis? That like in the modern era, a set like this gets punished extra hard because it's a little narrow, and because the balance is off a little bit. And in particular, the balance happened to skew, in this case, towards white-based decks, which are aggressive, which are tempo-based, which do kind of shut out a lot of nonsense. And, and if that's the case, it's going to make it tough for this to be everybody's favorite format by the end, when we've already all done so many drafts in such a short period of time.
I mean, Standard is suffering from this too.
Mm-hmm.
As much as everyone likes to bag on Standard, I'm kind of one of them. I haven't really enjoyed it. Though this current Standard is actually good. If you haven't tried playing it, I think this one's pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Magic in general is under so much more pressure than it used to be, and that's cool. It's a victim of success. I would love for to be making a game where it's like too many people play the game, so now it makes design harder.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing to keep in mind, if I were to be a designer on a Limited set, if I was someone who could make decisions and be part of the architecture of the set, I think you got to keep that in mind, and I think you got to bump up in your whatever priority list. And maybe they already have, and I don't know this. Again, I'm completely speaking hypothetically here. But one of the things I would put is we really got to seed it so that there's like deep replayable stuff in it, whether that means more build arounds or kooky combos. And sometimes it really just takes 1 uncommon or, 2 uncommons and a common to add like a new deck. Like,
mm-hmm.
We talked about the Spider Spawn deck, one of the most famous decks in all of Limited.
Mm-hmm.
It took like 3 uncommons to make that deck what it was, basically.
Yes.
Like, and you could probably have done it with literally just spider spawning because the set had its own theme. But like, the Burning Vengeance deck, that was 1 card. You just put Burning Vengeance in the deck. Again, the architecture was there to support it, but that's part of building a set.
Mm-hmm.
And I can even, if I were to go deep, I could probably name themed decks that weren't part of the normal set's theme, but just there was enough between two different uncommons could get there if you're, draft these like really sweet decks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you want to go higher on those than maybe you have in the past. And the other is like, and I know this is hard. Testing limited is especially hard because it's such a complete pain to like when you're still testing to get a draft file together and get 8 people to draft or play sealed or whatever. Even just getting 2 people to print out and play sealed decks can be difficult.
Uh-huh.
But you got to make sure that when you have a 5-pair format, you don't miss on 2 of the pairs or whatever.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna get hammered for it. And that's what's happening now. Like, look, I know Magic's selling more than it ever has and all that. I don't really care about that. Like, when it comes to the people who draft this set a lot, I think people are the overall tenors on is that they're unhappy with it. Mm-hmm. And I don't claim that I speak for everyone, we speak for everyone, or even that what you see online speaks for everyone. There's a lot of people who are playing New Capenna Draft and enjoying it, I'm sure. But I don't think that this is going to make the highlight reel. I don't think that the folks behind this set who are just in charge of the limited design of the set are high-fiving each other about how well they did.
Right.
I would be surprised if they were. And I think that you really it's a hard task. I don't envy them that part of it. Like, it's a hard job. They do really well. The average set is really good. Part of it is the average set's really good. They've set the bar so high, and that's a good thing. You want to set the bar high, but setting the bar high also means that you do make your job harder because you're not making Mirage in a sea of homelands and alliances where you just look like a complete rock star for putting a 4-mana 3/3 and making sure the curve is good.
Yeah.
The bar is high, and I think New Capenna is a pretty good amount below the bar when it comes to their how well the set plays out in limited. And I think we're seeing that, especially since we talk to and listen to and are impacted by a lot of the more invested players. But hey, if you're listening to a podcast about Magic Draft, you're pretty invested, and one way or another. So it's not invalid to say that like, I don't like this or this isn't that fun. I wish that they did better on this.
Yeah. One thing I want to get your take on, because listening to what you're saying here, one thing that comes to mind that I touched on a minute ago that might be part of the reason why it kind of feels like double trouble here is, okay, so we come in with expectations of triple color set and we want to do sweet, splashy, kind of ambitious things with our mana and therefore our decks. Okay. So then we take that fact and then combine it with, okay, they missed on a couple of the families or things got a little too concentrated on one end, one color pair, one color, and the power level was concentrated there. This is probably the worst case one to pick, right? If you were to tell me, they made this format too slow, right? Like it just doesn't have enough, like it's just one of those like really slow kind of nobody's doing anything for the first 2-3 turns of the game. And then people start setting up some engines to get going and it ended up being slower than they had hoped. That would be fine, right? Because this is a set where you wanted a little more breathing room. You wanted to be able to do some goofy kind of crazy stuff, go for 5-color decks sometimes, that type of thing. So if you missed in that way, you don't get punished as badly, right? If it was red-green or whatever that they had gone too hard on and the creatures are like, wow, like those are really powerful creatures for the mana and like the other decks have a hard time keeping up. It's a mid-range deck. It's like, that's okay, right? Like if that deck does it, you kind of shrug your shoulders and say, well, there had to be one deck that was the best. At least the removal can help you keep up or, do something against this. You can try to metagame against a bunch of green-red creatures or whatever. But when it's white, particularly white-green or white-blue, and we're talking about like tap your thing down, hit you, bounce your creature, hit you, tap your other creature down, hit you, use a combat trick and get you with it, cast Celestial Regulator, right? There's all these things that you can do in this format that are tempo positive, right? That give you something where you add to the board and then it takes away their stuff, even if it's temporarily. And next thing you know, you can start crashing. All the removal, which we're going to talk about for blue-white, for example, in just a minute here, it all lines up. Okay, not all of it, but the good stuff tends to line up with the tempo plays, right? Cards like Hold for Ransom aren't that good in a set that's really slow because you end up giving the card back and it just sort of buys you time. But if you're hammering your opponent, hold for ransom's like a hard removal spell, right? And when you look at these things over the, not just the power level where it gets cards like Inspiring Overseer, but also with the edges that keep going towards the more tempo oriented stuff, that to me is the 1-2 punch that makes the set struggle and I think makes it not as popular. It subverts your expectations and it does it in the way that you would like to least, which is that people are doing things for short-term gain, long-term loss, but they're winning because of it.
Yeah. Also Inspiring Overseer is like,
I mean, it's ludicrous. Yeah.
Insult to injury. Like, would white be the best if you replaced Inspiring Overseer with like literally a blank, right? Like white just got an unplayable 4 mana, 2/3 flying common or something that doesn't do anything. Mm-hmm. White would be good. It would certainly be weaker than it is now, but still probably pretty good. Brokers will still be good. I don't know how much better it would be, or how much Inspiring Overseer is playing into this, but white, and by extension, white, blue, white, green, getting a like literally mythic level bomb at common, like that is actually destabilizing.
It is. Know? We've never, I don't remember a time when we've seen a common. It's also, it's the insult to injury thing. Inspiring Overseer is better than like all the gold cards, right? It's easier to cast. It's less committal and it's in the color you want to be in as your primary anyway. And yet you are rewarded for this, right? Rather than, okay, fine, you can take the Inspiring Overseer. It's a solid card. But if you want to shoot for the stars, you take Broker's Charm, right? You take the triple gold card and you go for it. It's like, no, I can just take Inspiring Overseer as one color and I'm doing better on average than I would be if I took the gold card. That sucks. I mean, that's a miss for sure.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I don't think this format is as bad as maybe some people are saying it.
I don't either, by the way, for what it's worth. I agree with what you said. I think you characterized it well, but I'm not hating it.
Yeah, but it's also like it's not great.
It's not great. Like, that's right. It is not a great format. It'll definitely be forgotten. Before we move on to talking about the blue-white cards, you mentioned before that you figured that Wizards should definitely put concerted effort into making sure that sets have a lot of replay value, right? Given the context now of how often people draft, how quickly this happens for the dedicated players, right? We understand that there's a lot of people who just draft once or twice for a set and kind of call it good. But you're saying maybe before that was a fine place to keep your focus, but now you would change it to people who draft more?
Yeah, I think that you don't necessarily have to like it's not a zero-sum game.
That's what I was going to ask you too.
You don't cost people who draft 5 times anything by making a set interesting for someone who wants to draft 20 times, I don't think.
Okay.
Like, there are ways to do it badly, of course, but there aren't, it doesn't have to be that way.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask you. As a game designer, that is not a tug of war, right? You can have both. So does it just end up being time? You know, like they have to get it right so that like you can at least just have that first wave of players come in and go, hey, this isn't fundamentally broken and I can play this a few times and then go back to construct it or whatever. And like, that's the time frame that they have. And so they hit that checkbox and then they have to just kind of hope that it comes together. Is that probably the restriction?
Yeah. I mean, you don't want a format that's unapproachable. So like Modern Horizons 2, for example, I think, and that one's on purpose because that's, that's the whole point of that format.
Yeah.
But you don't want a format that's like completely unapproachable if you aren't super invested or planning on drafting it a bunch of times.
Okay. Well, good stuff, Luis. Let's talk about blue-white because there's still a format out. It's still pretty fun to play and it has shown the ability to adjust at least a bit. Pretty worried on week 1 that Brokers was just going to go end to end. And that hasn't been the case, though, we haven't exactly seen it hit some beautiful equilibrium either. So we've talked about some of the archetypes that we like, but we wanted to drill down a bit further and talk specifically about blue-white as a deck. And touching on what Luis said earlier in the show, we don't mean literally blue-white, we mean blue-white as a base.
Yeah, so when I say blue-white, I mean blue-white base splashing green or black, because those are the two that, are supported by the set. I haven't done like blue-white red yet, for example. it's hard to like find a way that would make sense.
I know. It's just the mana fixing just falls off because the duels you want aren't there. So then you have to use the sack lands as duels, and that's not really maximizing either.
So basically, I mean, the cool thing about this deck is it is a classic blue-white skies deck. Like that is really at its core. It's like a blue-white deck that's looking for flyers, cares about tempo, is pretty aggressive, and can utilize like bounce and pump spells to kind of close out the game, a couple counters here and there. I don't draft this like a control deck. I don't think that the card pool lends itself to that all that well, but certainly does to beat down. And that's why also, if I had to guess on percentages, I'm blue-white splash green like 3 times as often maybe as blue-white splash black.
Wow. So a lot more. Okay.
Yeah, I think it is definitely, it's definitely more on that side. And this is kind of the stuff we've been mentioning. 2 drops are really important. Counter spells are good. Like we'll talk about make disappear later, especially. Flyers use the +1/+1 counters nicely from like things like backup agent. It's got a little bit of a casualty and connive theme. It's got both those things kind of going on, and you can pretty easily put together little mini combos, which again we'll mention. And really, your curve matters a lot. So when I look at what the kinds of cards that, like I'm deep in the draft, I'm like, do I want, Echo Inspector or Backup Agent? Usually it's Echo Inspector. That card is better. But sometimes you're just in a spot where like, no, I need to take a 2-drop.
Right. And so you're willing to prioritize curve over power level even.
Yeah. I think that it's okay to take something that is a little bit weaker if it fills out your curve nicely. And especially you want to watch out because there's lots of 4-drops in the set, like a lot. So yes, Echo Inspector is fantastic. Like you don't want to miss on those, but sometimes you're looking at run out of towns and Echo Inspectors and swooping protectors, and you're just like, okay, well, I kind of got this covered.
Yeah.
The lands are really important, especially if you are going to splash, because ideally you don't actually. Like if you can draft a straight blue-white deck and just play 8 of each land, you don't have to even use picks on lands. Great, though. Of course, having like two lands is still better.
Have you had that happen?
Yeah, I've been straight blue-white before.
Okay, how often would you say?
Like if I draft blue-white 10 times, I expect to be straight blue-white 1 to 2 times.
Okay.
Have green like in there maybe like 6-ish times and black twice or something along those lines. That's my rough approximation.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more on black there. Maybe like 3 and 5. But when you look at splashes, so for example, black, the card I most often splash for is Keza, Queso, the 3/4 that drains them for 1 and you draw a card, because that card is awesome. First of all, it's a 4-mana 3/4 that drains them for 1 every turn. Second, it really combines nicely with everything you're doing, whether that's using connive, drawing cards off of splashed blitz creatures, really anything. There's a lot that you can get value from.
What does it say about me that I thought that card had flying? And I didn't bother to think that might be a little too powerful. I just thought,
I mean, it kind of looks like it could. I don't think that's unreasonable. It's a gold card. It's a headliner, uncommon, legendary. I actually find Girder Goons to be a fine splash. That card's just really strong.
It just is strong. I mean, it's just a great 4-drop. Period.
Yeah. And a great 5-drop. It's both.
Yes.
Obscura Charm, Nightclubber, Obscura Interceptor, Raffine. Basically all the...
Sorry,
you tried to
in the show notes. I put Inceptor, which I don't think is even a word, but
which you successfully incepted me.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I got you on the teleprompter.
And this is kind of the reason that you don't splash black as often. Like we just named two rares, 3 uncommons and 1 common.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not like this is the sum total of every single black card you'd ever splash, but like you don't splash black as often because there's really, besides Kesa, there's not that many things that are like super itching to splash, because the black removal is double black and murder and Deal Gone Bad, which is not a card I really want to splash. So you're not looking to splash all that often. Whereas green, you splash quite a bit because, first of all the Broker's cards are great. That's part of why Brokers is good. Disciplined Duelist is fantastic, just an absurd Magic card.
Totally.
Broker's Ascendancy, the same. Broker's Charm, quite good. And then Lagrella the Magpie, also very, very good. So tons of cards at uncommon and rare. And then Rock's Pummeler at common is actually a card I don't mind splashing here and there, because sometimes you just need something to close out the game, and it kind of does. And then it's not common, but Bouncer's Beatdown is also a card I've splashed for before. Sure. It's just if you need more interaction. The ideal skeleton of the deck is something like 14 to 18 creatures, a lot of creatures. You are looking to pressure your opponent and always have creatures in play. 2 to 3 combat tricks, 2 to 4 bounce spells / removal. And these numbers can obviously shift. If anything, if you're going to make one of these categories bigger and one smaller, you should probably make bounce and removal bigger and combat tricks smaller. I get a little worried when I'm at 5 combat tricks that I'm going to not run into situations where these combat tricks are good, because not every game goes according to plan. But I find it really good to have 3, maybe even 4 combat tricks sometimes, because when you're talking about Majestic Metamorphosis or Revelation of Power, sometimes Quick Draw Dagger, if you've got a lot of ground creatures, then you can get some good advantages out of using these combat tricks.
They also tend to scale up for me when I have creatures that affect the board when they enter the battlefield too. If you have a Celestial Regulator that knocks your opponent off balance, you get in for an attack. Now they are forced to react to you. So they have to put something on the board to block, and then they kind of have to block, right? And when you've got multiple things at common and uncommon that can come in and tap down their thing or get it out of the way, or just even be a removal spell for the turn or whatever, they are more likely to be forced into a situation where they have to make a block they'd otherwise prefer not to. And that's where your combat tricks really shine.
So when it comes to lands, I almost always just play 17. I haven't found Connive to be, well, see, it's funny. Connive pushes you both directions, actually.
It does.
If you have expensive Connive cards, you kind of want to play 18 lands because you have a way out of flood, right? You've got 3 Echo Inspectors. You're not going to flood out that often.
Yeah.
But you also want to discard non-lands to Connive to get the counter. But I don't think that means you go to 16 or 15 lands unless you're just I have 4, Rafine's Informant or something like that, which I haven't run into because people know that card's so good. So basically, I'll play 17 lands unless I'm playing exactly 2 colors and not splashing. Then I'm more likely to play 16 than 17. And let's rank the 2-drops because this is a big part of this deck.
Yes.
Well, 1 and 2 drops because we're counting the 2 1-drops, and these are at common. Broker's Initiate, the 1-mana 0/4. I don't play that card.
I think it's just unplayable. Yeah.
Found him to be good, and I'll always beat it when I play against it.
Yeah, same.
Broker's Veteran. This is the 2-mana 2/1 when it dies. You put a shield counter. I thought this card was going to be good, and it's kind of not been.
It's been bad. Yeah, I have this one on. Well, I have it here, the lowest possible tier. Yeah.
And then going up a tier, the middle tier is Backstreet Bruiser, fine card. I like this more if I've got a lot of flyers. That's the main reason. I don't really look at how many ways I have to get counters as a huge part of it because it just doesn't play out that way. Even if you do end up being able to attack with it, if you can attack with it on turn 6, that's still at that point probably a bit late for it to start even doing much.
Yeah.
It's a nice bonus, but it's not a big deal. On the other hand, if I've got, 10 flyers, I'm I would play 3 Backstreet Bruisers, no problem.
Just stop signs. Yeah.
Expendable Lackey. I like this one a lot. It works nicely with Connive. You discard it to your Connive cards and get value. It works nicely with Rooftop Nuisance and a little chat as casualty cards.
Yes.
And sometimes they play a 2/1 and you play this and you feel pretty good about yourself.
Yeah. The thing about the Lackey is for a card of this power level, which is relatively low, it's only a 1-drop. You need to really use every part of the fruit here or the bison or whatever it is. What is it? The cow? What is it? Anyway, you need to use every part of it because you can't afford to have, say, the fish token not be that relevant for your game plan, right? If that happens, then it falls off. It's barely reaching that good power level where you actually want it in a deck, but it does. That's the thing is the fish token is totally relevant to your game plan in decks like this. The discard to Connive is totally relevant to your game plan. It gives you a little bit of a threat from the yard and it gets you the counter, and the counter is important. I've never thought that I always try to talk myself into discarding a spell with my Connives because I find that the here and the now for my creatures with connive is more important than the late game more often than not. And that's weird, right? I mean, when I first read connive, I'm like, cool, I can loot away lands in the late game. It turns out I'm just looking for excuses to ditch spells to it. And Lackey's like begging to be discarded. So there you go. I
mean, the difference between a 2/1 and a 3/2 is not necessarily massive, right? A lot of the time, Rafine's Informant, you don't care too much. The difference between a 2/3 flyer and a 3/4 flyer is like a whole card.
It's just huge. It's
and that's another thing to think about. When you have a lot of connive, sometimes you intentionally want to save spells to discard to your better connive creatures as opposed to your worse ones.
That's right.
So after Expendable Lackey, big fan of Skycrier, the one on Flying Lifelink. First of all, if you get a +1 counter or equip a dagger to this or anything, it starts hitting for a really good amount of life drain, right? When you're hitting for 2 and gaining 2, that's a 4-point life drain. That's a lot. And then the draw card ability is really good. It
actually is good.
Like there's a couple of things that make it good. One, I've twice now decked my opponent by using it.
That's awesome. That's great.
Like the game stalls out. They've gone through a lot of their cards. This is both times they were playing Maestros, and I was just started using this every turn, and they just they weren't able to kill it in time. And even one of them actually killed it, but they had 5 cards left, and just couldn't close the game.
Yeah.
You also can just use it at the end of your opponent's turn in a close game, and then you get the first crack at casting the cards, whether they're creatures or not. Or you use it in one of those games when your opponent's got 5 cards in their hand and you have 1. Because that game is probably going to end with them having cards in hand. So in some senses, they're not even getting a card. It's almost like they're looting because the new card they draw, they could play instead of the cards they already have, but they're not playing all of them. So you're going to play all the cards you draw when you're in this situation.
Yeah, and the point you made about doing it on your opponent's end step is it's like when you stop and think about it, you're like, oh, right. Like think about the things that they can't cast. If you especially if the game ends that turn, like if you're looking for that one last thing to kind of push you through, they you go, okay, draw. We both draw a card. Any creature outside of a couple, they can't cast it. Any enchantment, any artifact, any sorcery, any land, all useless, right? It's like, oh, wow, most of your deck doesn't do anything. If I can kill you before it's your turn, then it's almost free most of the time. And even if that's not the case, you're still both getting a card. I mean, yes, you're down the mana, so it's not advantageous overall, but that comes up way more often than I thought. And then going back to what you said at the beginning of it, it goes from like annoyingly relevant at 1/1 to like, I have to deal with this once it gets to 2 power. Like that threshold is huge. So card's way better than I thought. It also pairs really well with our next card, as it turns out.
Yeah, but just imagine your opponent has 6 lands in play. You activate this end of turn, you untap, play your card. They drew a 3-drop and then they draw a 4-drop.
Right.
Like they might not be able to play both.
Totally. That happens. Yeah. I have not decked anybody with it, but I'm jealous that you've done it twice.
Yeah, it's good times. Backup Agent is the card you alluded to. This is the 2-mana 1/1 that puts a +1/+1 counter anywhere. If you've got no other 2-drop, you play a 2-mana 2/2, you're happy. If you've got other things to play, this is actually better to kind of hold on to because putting a +1/+1 counter on a Skycrier, a flyer, a fish token is really good. And this also gives you the counter. So your, Celestial Regulator or your Metropolis Angel start to get you additionally paid off.
Bruiser, half of a bruiser. Yeah.
So the second best 2-drop, we got 2 left, is Make Disappear. It's not even a creature. This is the counter spell that makes them pay 2. You can casualty to copy it. The reason this card is so good is that it when it's in your opening hand, it serves as a 2-drop that even trades for their 2-drop when you're on the play or their 3-drop when you're on the draw. And then it also just has utility later in the game. So this card is vastly overperformed. It's actually one of the top commons, on win rate, and that's just lined up with my experience. Card's great. I even put it in my standard deck. So, it did some good work.
Common made it in.
I honestly haven't even found diminishing returns. I played a deck with 3 of these and it was fine. So card is just fantastic. But the number 1 2-drop is Rafine's Informant. 2-mana, 2/1 connive. It can be a 3/2 for 2 when you're on the play and they don't have a 2-drop. You're like, I've locked in 3 damage, sometimes 6. It helps you filter. Keeping a 2-lander with one of these just feels very good. You draw it late game, it's still good, right? It's a reason to hold an extra land in your hand late game. Overall, just an excellent card. So Rafine's Informant is like in a tier by itself. And then, Make Disappear through like Bruiser is like the tier of all very solid cards. I would actually put Make Disappear above all the rest as well. And then Broker's Initiate and Broker's Veteran are the cards I had tried to avoid playing.
I have Backup Agent and Make Disappear really, really close. Like,
yeah, that's fair.
That's those two for me are kind of like interchangeable, but Informant's above both of them. What about the removal?
So the removal is a lot weaker, as it turns out. You know, I think that. So let's go through the removal, and then looking at the list of removal, and this is not typical of most sets. I would take Rafine's Informant and Make Disappear over every removal spell.
Yes.
And Backup Agent and the top removal still start to be close depending on where you're at in the draft, but Backup Agent's probably better.
Yes. That's true. Yeah, it's true. I would take Backup Agent over all of these.
The worst common removal is Buy or Silence. This is not a card I like to play very much. I mean, if you have to, you have to. This is the exile for 5 and they get a treasure. Just found it to be not very effective.
It's just so slow at 5 mana sorcery speed. Like you can just, this is a classic case where you can just do so much better with the level of power that you get here.
And sometimes you cast it and discover they're splashing a 4th color.
Yes, you do. I have had that happen. I'm like, are you serious? It was the 4/4 lifelink trample haste.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, that's going to make my life a lot more difficult.
Yep. I wish I had a Buy or Silence to kill that.
Yeah. I'm going to use it on a junker too.
Is kind of, this is the enchantment for 1 blue that turns it into a 1/1 no abilities. Mm-hmm. This is the card that, like Backstreet Bruiser, gets better the more flyers you have. In my all flyers decks, I played like 2 of these and been really happy.
Sure, totally
good. Less good when you actually want to attack on the ground, and now their chump blocker is relevant. Mm-hmm. Kill shot's fine. 2 and a white, kill an attacker, just fine. You know, not excited about.
It doesn't fit the aggressive deck very well. You know, you're
it pairs okay with flyers,
yes,
because you're going past each other like ships in the night, and then you can kill shot their attacker. Mm-hmm. But not a card I'm excited about. And then now we've gotten to the last 2, which are actually like, okay, yeah, I'm happy to have these. Hold for ransom, it's fine. Like you put it on their creature. If they have to spend their turn and you get a card back, that's totally fine too. It usually does the trick. And then Run Out of Town, the 3 and a blue bounce to the top of the deck, any non-land permanent. The fact that it hits other permanents can be nice. I bounced Rabble Rousing with this in response to the Hideaway trigger, actually.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and then it's just good. You bounce their creature, time ebb their creature. It's a 1-for-1 trade, and you kind of get it out of your hair for a while. So, yeah, these cards are all good, but it's funny, or at least the top 3 are pretty decent. But the 2-drops are all just better.
Yeah. And that also goes back to what you said about prioritizing curve. You also prioritize threats in this case. It's interesting because the removal's kind of bunched up power level wise, right? There isn't like a clear winner where you're like, hey, this is premium and the rest is just, they're all kind of compromises, but they're all also fine, where you get to default back over to the more proactive parts of your deck and prioritize those instead because of that. What are some of the combos you like? You mentioned some fun little combos that you like to put together.
Yeah, there's a couple little ones. Expendable Lackey and Rooftop Nuisance or a Little Chat are both great.
Yes.
Like once I have 2 lackeys, I start really looking for Rooftop Nuisances, and I'll play up to 2 of those. Because if you draw a lackey at any point, you either get to sack it or the fish, and tapping 2 things, drawing 2 cards is good. Lackey with Connive, mentioned that. And then Backup Agent can enable things like Celestial Regulator, Metropolis Angel, Backstreet Bruiser even. Backstreet Bruiser and Flyers that we mentioned. And then Illuminator Virtuoso is one we haven't touched on. This is the 1 and a white double strike 1/1, and then it connives whenever you target it with a spell. First of all, this is a card that will make me put Security Bypass in my deck.
Yeah, I lost to that pretty early, and I was like, okay. Like, I get it, because normally when people play Security Bypass, I'm like, it's probably below the bar. Like, you probably shouldn't have that in your deck. But when they put it on the Virtuoso, I'm like, all right, you got me. Like, I'm going to die to that really quickly.
Yeah, so...
And I did, by the way.
What's that?
And I did die to it very quickly.
No, I've lost to that too. It's also just a 2-mana 1/1 double strike in this format is fine, especially you put a Backup Agent counter on it or something. And then if you do cast a combat trick on it, I mean... when you're able to Majestic Metamorphosis and just fly over for 10 damage, that's also pretty nice.
Definitely.
So the Virtuoso is a card that not only do I like in isolation, but is worth building towards.
Very, very powerful card. I wonder how it does on win rate. Do you have a sense for it?
No, I don't actually know.
I don't either. I'm going to look it up though. It's fine. Oh wait, sorry, that's the wrong one. Yeah, it's still fine. Yeah. 58.6.
No, 58.5%. That's good.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That is quite good, I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's that good, but
it's better than Swooping Protector, Knockout Blow, Ballroom Brawlers, like when it comes to other white uncommons.
Yeah. No, that's solid. Okay.
So talking about some individual cards, Patch Up. This is the sorcery that returns 3 mana of creatures to play.
Yeah, do you play that card? I haven't even resolved that card.
So I played in a couple of scenarios. The most common one is if I have 2 or, lucky enough, 3 Inspiring Overseers, I'll play this because it's just basically adding another copy of Inspiring Overseer. Great. It's actually fine to do that.
That's really great. I never thought of that. That's funny.
The other is Hypnotic Grifter gets me a little interested because, first of all, I like Hypnotic Grifter. It's on my list to talk about. Second, if you've got 2 1-drops and a bunch of 2-drops, Patch Up becomes a pretty strong card. Getting back a 2-drop plus a 1-drop, and Hypnotic Grifter is the exact kind of 1-drop that when you get it back on turn 7, it's actually relevant to the game.
Yeah, because the downside or the tricky bit here is the lackey, right? Because
I don't really count
you
the
actually
lackey
want to use its ability from the graveyard more than bringing it back from the graveyard. So
yeah.
And
then Revelation of Power, Majestic Metamorphosis, Slip Out the Back. These are all cards I'm just happy playing. Slip Out the Back's a little different because this is less a combat trick, more of a counterspell for removal. Mm-hmm. But you've got, it's got ways to get value as well. Like you're able to remove a blocker or something along those lines, if needed. So,
where are you at on Majestic Metamorphosis?
Oh, I like it a lot. I think it's good.
Okay, yeah,
like
it sees heavy play and it's always impressed.
Yeah, I would basically play any amount of them, and it would push out the other combat tricks for me. Like that is I think the best one. Okay. Hypnotic Grifter. So this card's funny. This is a 1 mana 1/2 for 1 blue mana, and you can pay 3 to connive. Basically, if you have the time to activate it once and discard a non-land, it becomes a relevant game piece, a 2/3 on the board, and then it has this thing where you can attack into 3/3s, and if they block, you're forced to connive, but like they're losing their creature if they're tapped out, right? Mm-hmm. You're obviously not doing that in open mana hole that often. And then if the game stalls out, which it doesn't do very often, but every now and then you're in a spot where you're just using this once per turn and casting a spell, and like that is also pretty good. So I've had good experiences with this card. I don't think it's like the best card ever, but I think it's solid. Yeah,
I remember you brought it up early, and I was like, I haven't really been playing it. It just seems too clunky or whatever. But then you were like, look, if you get 1 counter on it, you're kind of in business. And it's not like you only paid 3 mana to get a counter. You also got card selection. And I'm like, okay, actually, that's true. And I did have one scenario where an opponent, I guess I'll say they beat me with it. We got to that 7-8 mana stage of the game, and then they were like grifting and augmenting their draw step. And they were just, I couldn't keep up, because they just basically didn't draw lands anymore. And I was like, okay. And I gave it a shot, and I was like, yeah, Luis was right. Like, this is actually pretty decent. The threat of activation is very real. The hurdle is getting a counter on it. Like, you get the first counter on it, and now it's like a very relevant creature in combat. They can't just throw blocks in front of it willy-nilly. But you do kind of have to commit that to it, I've found. But whatever, you can also just leave it back. Like, you can just not, you don't have to force the issue with it. So, yeah, I like the Grifter now. I'm a fan of it.
So yeah, I mean this deck is my most drafted deck, and yes, it doesn't always work. Like like you can't force it. I'm not. The way I would kind of describe my draft strategy is I look to draft blue, white, or brokers or maestros, kind of in that order. Mm-hmm. And if those aren't available, then you can cobble something together. Red black is a deck I like as well, like red black sack kind of. But you still kind of got to go with what's open. It's not.
Yeah.
If I mean, you saw it in the showdown. Like I opened, Zeator's Envoy and got past a bunch of Jetmir's fixers. So I went red-green. I did go 1/2 as well, but it was that was what I thought I was supposed to draft in that seat. So that still overrides that. But blue-white's really good, and getting to know even like kind of why we kind of went into the nitty-gritty here is because like that's what's going to give you an edge, even if you generally know, you're supposed to draft brokers more in the set or whatever.
Yeah, like I feel like if somebody came back to this episode in like a year and a half and they're like, oh, I miss this format or whatever, this is the show to listen to. I mean, usually the sunset covers kind of everything to give you like the big picture. But if you just wanted like, give me the keys to a car, what am I doing? I would say this, like look for blue, white, and then, you know, with a splash into green ideally, or black if needed, and off to the races you go. This to me is the sort of the core of the format. It's also probably why it's not being so popular, you know, because these are the type of cards that shut out a game where you like, this is the perfect deck to kill somebody with 5 cards in their hand still. And when you have slow mana and big kind of splashy gold cards and stuff, and like we have a whole cycle of cards that are like spend turn 2 doing nothing, right? It will help your mana. Don't worry about it. You'll come back later. These are powerful cards. When that's happening and people play decks like this, that's where you go, well, what am I supposed to do? Like you feel like you're being pushed in a direction that's not, you know, that you're going to lose if you do. And I think that that's what we're looking at here. But as spikes, as people who want to try to win, you know, this is what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to push against the format, and this is the deck that does that the best. So great stuff, Luis. Good breakdown. And if you're struggling in the format, maybe try to recenter yourself on a couple of decks like this, and then you can see if that helps improve that win rate. Any last thoughts before we take off, Luis?
No, I mean, we you know, we're looking at lining up Sirkovitz here to kind of dive into the format more, but I don't think that you know, Nuka Penna is going to be the main topic of our show for like the next month, for example. Like we're looking at moving on to like our more like level up or, you know, old set breakdown type episodes, just because we've given you we've done a deep dive on like the all the best decks in the format. Really, like I guess we still haven't done green white specifically, but it's not the deepest format. And yeah, you know, we certainly are. If things evolve, we're happy to talk about them. But like, this is not an all timer, and it's unfortunately not a short timer either. It's going to be a while to our next set. So yeah,
that's true. When we have Sirkovitz come on, we'll kind of use that as the, you know, the period at the end of the sentence, right? I think that, you know, we'll talk to him about what did we learn, what were the big picture stuff, and then we might touch on the format if things change, but otherwise, we'll get TBS on and do his episode. We'll do a Q&A episode, etc. That's just kind of where we're at with it. But again, I'm not as low on this format as some people on Twitter seem to be. I'm still playing it, still think it's okay. All right, let's call it a show there, Luis. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR, and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com. I want to thank our sponsors, Channel Fireball. Make sure you check them out for all your Magic needs, or other games too. If you play Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Flesh and Blood, you can find cards and stuff over there for that as well. Make sure you use the checkout code LR to help us out. We do appreciate it. The show's also brought to you by FTX, FTX.com outside the US, FTX.US. If you're ready to jump into that world, that's the place to go. They're safe, they're regulated, and they're ready for you over at FTX. Thanks so much for your continued sponsorship, FTX. And that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
Honestly, it's hard to come up with a lighthearted sign off in kind of the wake of the school shooting that just occurred, and the like, from all reports, absolutely pathetic, you know, police response to it. And as someone, you know, I've got a daughter in kindergarten. Like it's like unimaginable to me. Like kind of like that this is not only something that happened, but it's something that will continue to happen. Yeah. And it just, I don't know, it really weighs on me, and I don't really have anything I can say to make it better, you know?
Yeah, it's weird because it affects me, but I can't even imagine what it's like for you as a dad. I mean, you bring Nia to school and you have to think about this stuff. Like
she was at school when I was like hearing about this, you know, and I'm just like,
I can't like these types of things always really ground you, right? Because you and I are like analytical thinkers, right? We try to look at things objectively. That's part of what makes, you know, getting good at Magic or poker or games or whatever, you know, if you can separate out the human side of it, where you're like, well, my brain's telling me this, but here's the truth, right? And these situations are where that just breaks down, right? Where like, I can't, like, I could say, oh, well, you know, it's actually not that statistically likely, right, that it'll happen to you or to me, right? But it's like, that doesn't matter in these moments, right? Like there's a line that gets crossed where you go, this is unacceptable under any circumstance. And and then the frustration sets in, living here, because we've already had plenty of red flags just like this that were sort of those cross the line moments that you kind of think, okay, this is going to be it. And then it's not.
Look, I love living in the US. I don't want to live anywhere else. There's a lot of things I absolutely can't hate about this, and this death cult of gun worship, the fact that Uvad, 40% of their budget went for a police force who, again, by all accounts, we don't necessarily have all the facts, but we have enough information. They just stood around while their parents were in agony, teasing parents who wanted them to go in and rescue their kids. And I just really can't, and I wish I had something I could say or do to help, but my heart just goes out to all these people. And I don't know. I'm just, it's a lot. And I don't even know that I'm helping by talking about it now, but if you're listening to the podcast, it's kind of hard. I would imagine you've heard of this, and this, I don't know, man. It's hard to stomach that people are okay with this continuing to go on, and will be okay with it continuing to go on, and just try to be kind to people, I guess. I don't know.